Hello, 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 and welcome to the Nick Lugo Show, where I study the success tactics, practices, and principles of some of my favorite achievers, and hopefully give you the tools, tips, and tricks to do it yourself. And today I brought on an incredible guest. He is just magnificent. I'll give you a little bit of a bio. His name is Hogan Sherrow, and he has a Ph.D. in Evolutionary Anthropology at Yale University, has worked on 3 continents, studying everything from humans to grizzly bears to chimpanzees. He was named a Fulbright Scholar to Indonesia in 1999 and received his Ph.D. from Yale University, focusing on the development of behavior in wild male chimpanzees in Uganda. Hogan studied grooming dynamics, dominance relationships, mating, territoriality, and hunting. His research led to the first observations of dominance relationships in adolescent males and a greater understanding of male alliances and the development of hunting and territorial behaviors. Upon completion of his thesis, Dr. Sherrow began studying dominance relationships and territoriality in human males, as well as continuing his work on wild chimpanzees. His studies allow him to model and study evolution of dominance, alliances, territoriality, and politics in modern humans. Today, he shares his stories with these chimps and answers some very important questions about human monogamy, love, phone addictions, gender differences in behavior, dominance, and many more. I really enjoyed talking to him, especially about questions of, yes, sexuality, monogamy, and pretty much everything in between because, well, if we're really going to be honest about it, a lot of the things that drive our sexual nature is, well, subconscious, animalistic, and, well, very similar to chimps. So he's here to give us some answers today. And, well, we start off pretty, let's say abruptly. So be prepared for it. And you know what? Check out the sponsors in the video below and check out Hogan Sherrow. Enjoy. The first question I have to ask for you, and this is just the overarching question, the thing that has been on my mind for so long. Are humans naturally monogamous? And just, tell me the answers.
Wow. Yeah, let's no wading in here. Let's just dive into the deep end. So what the data show, and that's where I try to stay as much as possible. When we look at like cross-cultural studies, look at what kind of is happening universally in humans. What we see is a pattern of sort of serial monogamy. We see where humans everywhere, they do experience romantic love. They get that kind of really strong lust for one another. They develop a really strong bond. But everywhere that bond is not a lifelong thing. And, I spoke about this on my own podcast that there really are no true mate for life animals. Every animal in the world, no matter how much they want to be biologists or whoever's studying them want to portray them as mate for life, they're really mate for while the mating is good. So, even if you have, say, wolves, which are a classic mammal example, or seabirds, several different seabird species that are, great examples from the bird world. They mate while they're producing good offspring. And then if they stop, then one of the mates leaves, and you kind of think of that logically and you go, well, yeah, because it's not like you got a lot of time to waste. You can't really, hey, that's okay. We produced 2. That's cool. Humans are the only animals that do that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And even with humans, what we see that, so there's that kind of, I guess one thing that we should do is we should define, when you say, are we naturally monogamous? There's monogamy in sexual action. There's monogamy in mating and actual producing of offspring. There's social monogamy. And humans aren't socially monogamous. We're sexually monogamous, I think, for a time period.
Let's get into that. Yeah, let's get into that to start off. Like, all right, so we're sexually monogamous for only a short period of time. So right away, we have a little contradiction with what we would call marriage, right?
Oh, yeah.
So, so explain to me, right? First of all, why do you think we evolved like marriage was, why was marriage created in the first place? And where's the tension? Why do we see so much tension in, 50% divorce rates, something like 50% cheating or infidelity rates? What is sort of this strong tension between culture and, let's say, biology?
Oh, well, I don't know that anyone can answer that fully, but I would say that first, um, so let's go back to the monogamous part.
Yep.
Um, if we're looking at cross cultural data, most non-Western groups, there's pair bonding. So and they may even have a ceremony. They may even have marriage rituals. But usually, leaving the marriage in a lot of those groups is a lot simpler than it is in our societies. So it's sort of, this isn't working for me, I'm moving over there. Um, and that's kind of, that's kind of the norm around the world until you get into this formalized, it's a legal document, you're bound to each other. And then we kind of put this cultural dressing on it, romanticizing it of till death do us part and all of that.
Yeah.
And I think that you get that tension because I don't think humans evolved as being lifelong partners with another human being. They the data kind of, there's a wide range there, of course, but on average around the world, most of the studies have shown it's somewhere around like a 7 to 9 year period where, you're together for between say 5 and 9 years, and it kind of averages out around 7. I used to joke in my classes that, for anyone out there who knows classic movies, there's a reason that it's called the 7-year itch. And often I think when we talk about cliches exist for a reason. They exist because there's a lot of truism there. And I'm not saying that every relationship is destined to end at 7 years or someone's going to go cheat or something like that. That's, again, just large numbers, the average.
Well, that's one of the things. Yeah, I mean, I think it's super interesting. Like, okay, you know what? The problem with marriage is that there's just this like feeling within both people that just like it's annoying, right? It gets to a point where it's just annoying. Like this 7-year itch, and one could argue, and obviously you're a evolutionary biological anthropologist. I'm sorry, I don't really know the terms, but yes, you are. So, like the thing about it is like, that is your biology trying to tell you something, right? Like that itch is coming from somewhere.
Yeah. And, I mean, there was a evolutionary anthropologist named Don Simons who was at UC Santa Barbara for years. And he used to do this very eloquently, where he pointed out, you may have these biological tendencies. It doesn't mean that you have to adhere to them. He used himself as an example. He knows that he's supposed to be, according to biology, he's supposed to be producing as many offspring in the next generation as he can. Yep. He had chosen not to have any kids. He knows that his biology was adapted to eat meat as part of his diet. He had chosen to be a vegetarian. He would go on and on and on about all these great examples of we can choose. So like, if you're in a relationship and hey, so what if you hit 7 years, you're still happy together? You just keep trudging along, right? You can choose to go beyond that. And outside of that sort of norm.
Yeah.
Well, that's for an evolutionary anthropologist, let me just say really quickly that the really interesting thing is that if you look at child development in a lot of non-Western populations, kids become self-sufficient enough to be able to add to the food brought in and be able to take care of themselves a little bit around the age of 7. So for me, that's a really telling marker. of it's really hard to get at, to study that exactly. But if we're seeing, and correlation does not necessarily equal causation, but if we're seeing across the world, kids are becoming kind of self-sufficient around age 7. They're aware of dangers. They've got a sense of mortality. They've developed a theory of mind where they've got a sense of themselves compared to others. They're contributing some food. They're going out foraging with mom. They're bringing in some food every day. And that's about the time that couples stay together. That makes a lot of sense of, well, that's how long selection should sort of pressure you to stay together to make sure that your kid survives.
Yeah. And in that lecture, you said, the mother is obviously the most important thing that predicts children's survival. Duh, right? The second most important is the father, right? And that sort of makes sense, right? Just intuitively, it's like, all right, you know what? Who has the most incentive to stay along with the kid? It's the one who holds it in their stomach for 9 months, right? Instead of the one that just spends 15 minutes, But then you have the second one, right? When you have this emotional bond, when you have this sort of romantic love that, again, is only present in humans, which is really, really weird, they also somewhat have an incentive. And part of that incentive is for the kid. Part of it is for to stay in the romantic relationship. And I think that's something super interesting to note. It's like, yeah, you know what? That's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a really strong signal there evolutionarily, and I think that one of the things that's important, and you did a nice job of mentioning it there, is that strong drive for the father to stay involved. One of the critical things is he has to be pretty sure he's the father.
Yeah.
And that's part of where that monogamy and that pair bonding comes in, is when the female is basically giving him paternity assurance. You are the father. You're the only one that I've been with. And we know from ape studies that the other apes they know when females have been with other males before, like they're able to kind of piece it together of she was with 27, like in chimpanzees, she was with 20 of the males and then a baby was born. Wow. And it's not like they have calendars. It's not like they're just able to recognize the stages.
Yeah.
And so, it's pretty easy to see that humans can do that. And even our ancestors almost certainly were able to do that, where they were able to say, in their own minds, okay, she's only been with me and now a baby is born. So that baby must be mine.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the things, though. Like part of that kind of blew my mind a little bit. First of all, there was a study that came out in Britain or somewhere in the European Union where I think it was Britain, where they estimated that 12% of the children that are born, the fathers are misguided in their belief that it's their kid. And come on, like think about that. And one of the big myths that busted in my mind, and when I listened to your podcast lecture, I had the same sort of, it reinforced that this belief is that women aren't as, let's say, monogamous as society tries to make them out to be. And of course I've noticed this in college, and of course, like I've noticed this through scientific understanding, but it's not as simple as, like the women just choose one guy and stick with him. That's basically what the Bible is trying to tell you. But you know what? Like, throw an extra wrench in there. In a lot of studies, there are women or female chimps that are purposely tricking their male partners, where they say, okay, you know what? I'm going to get with this beta, but I'll have sex with the alpha and then make the beta think that it's his kid, and therefore have the best of both worlds. I have the best offspring and also the protection that comes from having a father along with the kid. So, like, give me a little bit more on that. Throw that little wrench in there.
So yeah, I mean, I like to say, that no male mammal in the world can be 100% sure that an offspring is his, unless Maury Povich is involved. Right? That's the only time that you're going to get. And studies show the kid is yours or not yours. And certainly that's not happening in the wild. Although that would be, I'd love to see like paternity among lions, and
Maury Povich among apes.
but yeah, I think the thing is that here's what I think has been misguided about women, and I want to make sure that we're kind of clear on women versus females, like female apes, and not blending them together.
Yep.
I'm making sure that I'm not. I think one of the things that's been misrepresented and misguided about women is thinking that they're somehow like passive passengers on this whole family reproduction train, where like, oh, Prince Charming comes along and you dedicate yourself for your entire life to him, and you produce kids for him, and you're a good wife, and blah blah blah. And the thing that I find really intriguing is that no, women are being very strategic, even when they find their Prince Charming, and he's a senior director at Microsoft and brings in $700,000+ in his base salary a year, and they have a nice life outside of Seattle and everything else. She may decide that, and she may not consciously think this at all. Her subconscious may decide he doesn't have the right pheromones. He's not the guy that I want to produce my kids. And so, it's not a, oh, women are scheming or anything like that. It's that every organism is strategic about getting the best possible combination with their genes in the next generation that they can. And most of it's happening subconsciously. Most of it's happening at levels that, you couldn't even, it wouldn't matter what kind of therapy you put yourself in, you're not going to dig deep enough to get in there.
And that's one of the things, like, we try to, like, obviously this is a big thing in college. People are trying to do this in general conversation. They're trying to understand attraction. They're trying to understand sexuality. They're trying to understand all of these things. And it is just so damn complicated.
It is.
And think about it, like, how are you supposed to define, okay, you know what, if I do X, Y, and Z, she'll fall in love with me. If I do X, Y, and Z, she'll be attracted to me. All of these things are just so, like, unpredictable, and that's the problem, right? So let's say you're a guy, and I know you study male chimpanzees all the time, so I'm gonna ask for a little bit of pointers on this, but, you go up and you approach a girl, and you apply some sort of tactic, right? Whatever it is, pickup line, blah, blah, blah. And let's say you do that, you have no idea why she turned you down. That's the problem, right? She could have turned you down because of pheromones, right? Pheromones, if for the people who don't understand, that's smell. That's the odorless smell that gets them, that tells a woman, that communicates to a woman, and from both ways. Is this an alpha, beta, zeta, however you want to describe it? Is this the right man for me? We don't even have to use those Greek terms. And that could be the reason, right? And you're not in control of that, but that also could be you had a shitty pickup line, or you had bad body language, or all of these things. So, let's see what you got.
Well, I would say that the safe advice is to not act like a male chimpanzee. So don't go and jump on her back and pound on her head and bite her ears. That's probably not gonna get you very far in today's society.
It'll get you to jail. It'll get you somewhere.
I'm saying as an initial greeting, and I guess it depends on what party you're at, but and Bloomington may be a little crazier than back in my school days.
Trust me, we're not at that level yet.
But I think it's actually something that is constantly shifting depending on where you're at. So male approaches to females, and no matter how we slice it, no matter how modernized or how liberated or um, how empowered women are. Again, we're talking averages, but most approaches in courtship still happen male to female, males go approaching females. And I don't want to get into, the different sexualities there, and bisexualities and et cetera, because those are a conversation that's well beyond the time that we have now.
We could take 5 hours if we want to go
And
that deep. Yeah.
the other part of that is that when we're talking trying to talk about humans in the same sense that we talk about wild populations as the larger sort of reproductive populations. So again, big numbers. But if we're just looking at that male-female courtship, part of the challenge for males, you're absolutely right, is that they don't know why. And in a lot of situations, it's changed. For example, when I was your age, it was a very different approach that males would take to females and different expectations. I mean, things as simple as this little device that I'm using to talk to you today have altered the game in our post-industrial societies like the U.S. drastically. I remember when I was teaching at a university and I had advisees, and they would come and ask me questions. They asked me the same sort of advice that you were just, so give us some insight here. You study human behavior. And I mentioned one day to one of them of the idea of just calling this young woman who gave him her number and et cetera, and asking her on a date. And he was like, why? So she would think I was a stalker? And I was like, what? No, that to me, in my generation, that's normal behavior. In your guys' generation, it's much more common to send a text. What are you doing? See you later at I see you later at this house party or whatever, and not any sort of set date of we are going to go do this thing on Thursday. And I realized, oh, okay, so you guys have figured out ways to kind of take some of the pressure off.
Yeah, yeah.
At the same time, it leads to more confusion because you're unsure of the status until you get further into things.
Yeah.
And so I think that it is a big challenge. I think that you're absolutely right that one of the toughest things for guys, I think, is that if they're the ones doing the pursuing, they don't know why. And you can flip that around, right? That's not gendered. One person turns down another. Yep. You typically don't get like a nice little summary from them of why they chose not to.
Yeah. And even if you ask them, they wouldn't know. So it doesn't matter.
No, they exactly. They may not have any idea. I mean, I have some friends that when they met, they had no idea why they were overwhelmingly attracted to each other.
Yep. Neither
of them was physically the type of the other person, yet they could not stay away from each other. And finally, I said, you guys, when you guys get a chance, why don't you have your immune complexes tested? Because my guess is they complement each other really well. And there were those signs. You mentioned pheromones, and pheromones are really strong, even in a species like ours with a terrible sense of smell. And I think that those are the things that are the hidden mysteries of sort of human behavior that we just don't have the data on, and we can't really speak to something like pheromones right now. We're getting there, but we don't have a good way to measure them. We don't have these ways to. We have kind of these proxies. So, for example, I don't know if you know about the studies where they will have women sleep with the T-shirts of the men that they're involved with.
Yep.
And they ovulate sooner than expected when they're sleeping with the t-shirt. They, at the same time, they tend to get better sleep, all sorts of things. And the same thing will happen for men. But I think in that, there are some predictabilities. So, for example, women everywhere, even when they want, even a few years ago when metrosexuality was sort of the rage, women still wanted men who were recognizable different from them as men.
Explain
They didn't want men who had gone so far as to kind of feminize themselves to the point that they looked like heterosexual women. Didn't want men who had feminized themselves to the point that they look like they're kind of interchangeable. Most women don't want that. At the same time, like tons of variation, and subcultures between just universities. If you were to hop over, to University of Illinois, there'd be a completely different local pattern of courtship.
Well, that was actually really funny. So my guys, they went down to Nashville, and Nashville was they just went down to Nashville, not for a college, but it's a college town. I think that's Vanderbilt. I'm pretty sure that's Vanderbilt. And they went down, and they're like, "Wow, like it is so easy." They're like, "Dude, it's so easy to get girls down there." Like, like like it's completely different rules, completely different ball game. Like that is just the way it is. And that's one of the things that I'm starting to notice. And I read this book. It was called A Billion Wicked Thoughts. If you've ever heard of it, it was essentially a group of data scientists came together and they just looked up Google searches, right? They analyzed,
okay.
I think it was Bing, it wasn't Google, it was some other platform that they got access to. It was like 7% of all Google searches in like the 2000s. And they just, what did men want? What did female want? What did they look for? What were the patterns in those exact people? And they kept it anonymous, but at large they were able to extract patterns, and it was just mind blowing. It was just absolutely mind blowing. And a lot of the things that they were able to discover was that like a lot of the female sexuality, right? So men are really focused on looks. Women are really focused on sort of the intangibles, and a lot of the things that they were focused on, women were whether or not they fit into something like the social norm. Like if you're walking around and everybody's wearing, everybody's stylish and you look not stylish, even if that would have been stylish in the 1600s, if you just don't look, if you're not fitting the style of 2021 that we're in right now, then it's just not attractive, right? It's a turnoff. And a lot of it is socially constructed. But yet I did want to ask the question, what are the immutables? Across the chimps, bonobos, gorillas, humans, what are the things that span across time, attraction, sexuality, all of it?
No. Well, hard to say with across all the apes, because in bonobos, I mean, talk about throwing a wrench into things.
They're Nashville.
They're an interesting example of females figuring out a way to get power and keep males in check. One of the things that people love to talk about bonobos as the make love not war hippie ape. And the reality is that bonobo males are kind of, they're a little neotenized, so they have some infant characteristics compared to chimpanzee males, higher pitched voices, less musculature, smaller canine teeth, things like that.
Okay.
But those go right in line with the behavior of females, keeping them in check. So the whole female bonding in bonobos, a big portion of that seems to be specifically to keep males from getting out of hand.
So they kind of like team up against the men if they get
absolutely. Yeah. If males start to get kind of rowdy, females will form coalitions and go right at them and put them in their place.
Wow.
And that is completely different than what happens in their sister species, chimpanzees. In chimpanzees, when males start getting rowdy, females climb trees and get out of the way. The males are gonna tear some stuff up, and that's all there is to it. In gorillas, males are twice the size of females. Females don't even have a chance. I mean, as far as trying to physically keep a male, in control. Instead, it's get out of the way. But what female gorillas have is they have the ability to leave the group. So if a male is too harsh and he's just, too domineering, females will, if they find him to be unsafe, will leave the group. So I think each of them has their own little evolutionary path. It's hard to say what cuts across. I would say that what cuts across most apes is that females like powerful males more than they like weaker males.
Okay.
They prefer powerful males more than they prefer weaker males. Even among bonobos, they want a strong male bonobo. They just don't want him to be belligerent.
Okay.
So I think that's maybe one thing.
What about social class, right? Like, does he need to be the highest amongst the males? I know in line, obviously, right? Like only one male mates with basically all the females.
Yeah, in chimpanzees, you have a very rigid dominant structure. In bonobos, you have a dominant structure. In gorillas, typically you've only got one big male, so you don't really have a dominant structure in males, and females have this very kind of fluid structure. The researchers who have been with them for years can tell who the higher ranking females are, but it's not a strict dominance hierarchy. So status definitely impacts access to females in chimpanzees, seems to impact access to females in bonobos. Gorillas, again, if you're the male, then obviously you've got access to all the females. In humans, I think status or rank definitely has a huge impact. And when you said about the stylish part, like that whole kind of fitting in, that goes into that is the male who fits in stylistically and lifestyle wise and everything else, but is maybe the best at certain things, or is recognized as that male is going to be favored, and again, that changes over time. One of my favorite interviews with Bill Gates was talking about how, someone asked him a question like, what's it like to be Bill Gates? And he said, well, in the 21st century, it's really good. And he said, but if we were in the 17th century, it wouldn't have been so good, because being a blacksmith would be a lot better than being Bill Gates.
Yeah. And
he was pointing out, if he had to swing a blacksmith's hammer, he'd be screwed. Like,
and he'd be at the bottom. Yeah.
And so again, this gives us that wonderful lesson about evolution, is that everything's always changing and nothing's static. And that's why I think it's hard to say what really cuts across all the apes, is because each of those species is going on their own evolutionary path. Context is always changing.
Well, let's see if I could pull out some info from that, because I think there are a lot of principles that were underlying underneath. One of them is that no matter what the hierarchies are, no matter what the games are, whether or not you have to be Bill Gates or you have to be a blacksmith in the 17th century, it's attractive if you win the game, whatever the game is, right? So maybe, Bill Gates probably has, even though he's not your typical, macho man, he won the game and he's got access to whatever he wants if he wants it. At the same time, you also have something like status. And this was one of the things that really, opened my eyes a little bit, because I'm in the Kelley School of Business. And one of the big things about the Kelley School of Business is that we love our finance. We just absolutely love it. People are so willing to sell their souls, to not the devil, but something like the 80, 90 hour work train. They'll put in their 80, 90 hours for the Jaguar, Mercedes, $100,000, and essentially, and it would be so ridiculous to completely separate that from sexuality, because of course you're trying to get the high status, so you get with the highest made, and so you have more access to reproductive opportunities. Finance is dominated by men, and this is something that we didn't even talk about, but across all of history, and you could correct me if I'm wrong on this, 80% of women were reproductively successful, but only 40% of men were. And of course it's because men have a lot less of an investment. All they have to do is deposit a little bit of sperm. They could get with multiple women, when, of course, for women, they have to wait 9 months for that to happen. So, you have this huge status symbol that comes in, and everybody wants to buy their Jaguar. And I think, across cultures, status is something that's really, really popular. The women all love the status. And unfortunately, does that turn them into gold diggers? I don't know, but, something like that.
Probably not gold diggers, but so let's take those kind of in chunks. I don't know the exact data on success in reproduction, but I would guess that it's even probably a little wider variation than what you said there. I think your numbers are probably pretty conservative, and well done, because you should always be more conservative with your numbers than you should, but it's probably, at least 80% of women reproductively successful, because again, remember, they have maternity assurance. Yep. If it comes out of their body, it's theirs. They know that it's theirs. Males have no way of knowing. I joke about my daughter, my younger daughter, looks so much like me. I mean, it is. There are times when I felt really bad for the kid, but somehow she's a really beautiful young woman, and I'm like, but you got so many of your dad's traits, but you've turned them into just like awesomeness. But when you see us together, there's no doubt that she's my kid, and it's been that way from the day she was born. Still, even with that, I used to joke that even with that visual assurance, I don't know for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I trust her mother. We were in a monogamous relationship. I know that, that I was the only one she was with. But the point there is to use myself as an example of no male mammal knows for sure. And that's where that variation comes in, combined with, as soon as males were able, and this is where status comes in, as soon as males were able to stockpile resources in any way, whether that was grain being grown, whether that was rice, whether that was, precious metals, whatever that was, that gave them resources that you could use to keep kids alive. Now, as soon as they can hold on to those, and you have an imbalance in which males have those and which don't, now that variation in male success is going to just go off the charts. Some males are never going to produce offspring, because what the females need from those males is they need them to invest in the kid, and the way you invest in the kid and the mom is by resources and that attention and everything else. But that's why the status is so important, is because status leads to resources.
So now let me ask you this question, and now we're going to sort of get into speculation here, but I think this is something important. Now that resources aren't as scarce, like especially in America, in mass, people aren't struggling to feed themselves and, aren't struggling with death of starvation or anything of that sort. Now that we have something like that, and now that, for example, survival isn't as, let's say, pertinent of a struggle. You think of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We pretty much, we're not amazing, but we've figured out, people have food, people have water, they're not dying of all these things. Now that all of these things are sort of locked in place, does the psychology remain? Right? Even though we have these ancient systems, or since we have these ancient systems, do they just go away, or do they sort of stay constant? And the question is really, are women still looking for resources? Do children still need to depend on their fathers because that's the second person who's most likely to bring you to lifetime success, even though that is just completely irrelevant in many cases, right? Why would you need a father logically, right? If you take out the human aspect, why would you need a father? So I guess the question is, do these things remain, and sort of what is the belief on that?
So the first thing to remember is that, yes, Americans, most Europeans, a fair amount of Asians have gotten to a point where we're not typically worried day to day, most people, about starvation.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, even within those societies, we have a huge number of people who are.
Yeah.
And so even within, let's just use America, with 330 million people, 45 million of those people are food unsure and experiencing homelessness, have some sort of struggle like that. Minimum 45 million do. So that's a huge percentage of of our population, right? It's over 10% of our population. But then let's flip that number and say we got 330 million Americans. Even if all of them were okay on food, okay on disease, okay on shelter, etc., we're still a very small part of 8 billion people.
Yep.
And the majority of the world still has struggles of, just the other day when they announced the malaria vaccine that has now been approved.
Yep.
And I posted that to my social media. Game changer was the only thing I said. And the reason why is I've worked in the tropics for 20 plus years. I know literally dozens upon dozens of people, probably hundreds of people easily, who have malaria, have had it since they were children, every single year get impacted by malaria, where it's a chronic situation.
Yeah.
I know, so many people who have lost family members. That's one disease that has ravaged the tropics, and the majority of the tropics until last week still had to deal with that. And for the next couple of years will, because it's going to take a while to roll out the vaccine. Hopefully they're not as anti-vaccine as many Americans are about COVID, but I won't go into that. Hopefully folks in malarial areas are appreciating and understanding that the vaccine is going to be a good thing overall. So the point there is that most of the human population still is struggling with some aspect of that. So it's hard for us to say, does that psychology go away? Because worldwide, no, there's no reason for it to.
Yeah, and also, like, especially in college, like I'm sitting here, and especially if you're trying to choose a mate, you're very uncertain. Even if you're secure now, maybe you're unsecure in the future. Like a big thing.
True.
A big reason why a lot of my friends go into finance is because they're like, I don't want to starve. And I'm like, really? Like, you have to work 80, 90 hours a week so you don't starve? Like, a little extreme, but I could see the case.
I'm curious. Let me ask really quickly. Do you know the numbers, men versus women in the Kelley School? Right? You said that's a school of business, business and finance that you're in. Do you know the percentages?
Oof. Okay. Let me draw on my memory. So, for context, nationally, about 55% of women are in higher institutions and 45% of men. That's nationally, just in all college. Now, in marketing, right? So I'm a marketing major. So there aren't that many men that are marketing majors, So I'm pretty sure our marketing department has 90% women. Not positive, but
Okay.
it's up there, right? And a big anecdotal thing is kids who go into marketing classes are saying I'm one of the only males in there. For the finance classes, it is overwhelmingly male. I can't tell you the percentages, but in my classes that I'm taking at the moment, it's probably something like 80-20.
Okay. I was just curious because that back when I was in school at the University of Oregon, the business school was the same sort of breakdown where it was overwhelmingly men. And back then there were a lot of women who had gone into the MBA program specifically looking to find their mate. You know, they were going to find that man who's got the same interests that they do, who is going to work the 80, 90-hour weeks. And yeah, I knew, you know, anecdotally, I knew many of them who were, yeah, I'm here because, you know, this is where I'm going to find my husband. And I was just like, wow, that's an amazing thing to hear on a university campus.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the things that I find super interesting, you know, and this sort of blows my mind. So, for example, I'm one of those guys, I'll work the 60, 70, 80-hour weeks, you know. I know a lot of men that are also willing to put in the 60, 70, 80-hour weeks. Again, finance is 80-20, right? I don't know if I made that explicitly clear, but yeah, the finance classes are typically 80-20 males. And that's one of the crazy things that I've sort of realized. And if we take sexual selection theory, which is the idea that 40% of men reproduce and 80% of women reproduce, or something even more extreme than that, then the first thing that we could derive from that is that men are more likely to take risks as a result. Because women, if you follow the status quo, then you will be reproductively successful, evolutionarily speaking, of course. But if you're a man and you follow the status quo, you will not be evolutionarily successful. And that is just basic statistics. And of course, we're going to evolve that way. Given that, you ask the question, and this is the question that I ask all the time. Why would anybody decide to work for 80, 90 hours a week? Why would anybody dedicate their life to something so awful, so terrible, such as finance, being a lawyer, being an accountant, like being a doctor, all of these things? And you could find meaning in all of these professions. I'm not saying that, but these are the professions that are known to be the most miserable, and people are only doing it for the money. And you ask the question, why would somebody be doing that? And the answer is pretty obvious, right? And it's something like to get a mate, to get security, to get all of these things. And, you know, there's a clear biological evolutionary answer to that, which makes the most sense to me, although there's many different interpretations that you could possibly offer. Now you bring that in and you say, why are all of those professions dominated by men? And the answer is also clear to me. And obviously you could say there, and you know, you can't even bring in the argument that women have been repressed. And actually you probably can, but you know what, I'm going to diminish it on the fact that, well, women choose marketing in large degrees, and also women outnumber men in universities in general. And it's like, you know what? The reason why men are doing it is because it sucks. And they have to take the damn risks. Because why would a woman have to work? Why would she choose to work 80, 90-hour weeks? It makes no sense. And then you ask the question, why would a man want to work 80, 90-hour weeks? And, you know, I guess the benefits are more clear for the man. But at the same time, it's like, God, like, why, like, if you're a woman, it makes no evolutionary, logical, or any sort of sense to work the 80, 90-hour weeks. It just doesn't make sense.
Sure. I think that is right on. It doesn't make sense, but I think one of the things that we're seeing happening now, because what you've got happening now over the last 50 years is a lengthening of the generation period times. And I'm not talking about the social generations of like millennials and Gen Z and that sort of thing, but actual birth rates. The, you know, like you did that quick math when we were talking that I had my daughter when I was 33. That's happening a lot with women where they're not having kids at 19, 20 years old.
Yep.
They're extending that out to their late 20s into their 30s. So lots of more and more women. And this is primarily the US, Europe. So again, small part of the population. But it's the correlation there is when women get education and get opportunity, they extend that birth period. So even in developing nations where women, they focused on female education, then they see their birth periods starting to stretch out and get wider, get further apart. That comes into play because now women are taking on those kind of, because they have an interest in it. Now, I hear you. For me, look, I'm an anthropologist. Finance is probably the last thing that I would be interested in spending 8 hours a week on, much less 80. But I think obviously there are people that are interested in it, and I think for those women, they see that opportunity, they do it. A lot of women now are saying, "Hey, if I work that hard, then I don't have to rely on a man's resources."
Yeah.
And they're finding different ways to do that. Like you said, they're going into marketing and they're figuring out ways to do it. But I think there is a reality that comes in that's a biological reality that if those women do want to have kids, regardless of their financial standing and nannies and et cetera, if they want to have kids, they're not going to be working 80 or 90 hours a week when they're pregnant.
Yeah. Yeah. And
they're just not.
And that's one of the things, we make these comments and obviously we make them en masse, right? Like there are definitely going to be, many women who just say, I don't want to have kids. And there are also, like, I met this girl yesterday who was just in an entrepreneurship club and she was just like grinder, like 80, 90-hour weeks, has her own blog, blah, blah, makes all this money in college, doing all these crazy things. And she freaking blew my mind. Like I barely meet men that are like that. And again, like we're just speaking averages, like great for her. Like she's doing really, really freaking well. But then, I asked her, like I asked her straight up and, I asked this to basically anyone who's working all that stuff, including myself, like why? Right? I go like, okay, so the first question I asked her was how many hours do you work per week? And she's like, don't even ask me. And then the second question is, I said, why? And it's such a, like, first of all, you can't really put a finger on it, right? Like I just work because I work. Like I don't know why I work.
It's a subconscious drive that a lot of people they don't understand.
Exactly. And you know what? Like that's fine. But you know what? There are many women that I know that unfortunately, I feel like this is something like an evolutionary disadvantage if they want to choose this life route, which is something like the workaholic route, even if you don't want to call it that. You first of all, like I know one of my friend's mom, she was working on Wall Street, New York City, doing all that stuff. And then she had kids and she was like, I can't do it anymore. Right. And that's sort of the limitation that's put on you. And then you have to make the decision, damn, do I want to have a kid or do I not want to have a kid? And that's a big question. Guys could kind of figure it out a little bit later. They could have kids 40, 50, 60, 70. So, it's definitely an evolutionary disadvantage. But my sort of case that I'm making is, why would you even want to go in this route in the first place? Like, damn, it's.
Well, I think I like the way that you frame it, because I think asking that of anyone is the critical part, because most certainly what has happened historically is that women have grown up being told that those aren't the professions for them.
Yep.
And we saw this with med school before med school started to shift and you started to get more women who actually could become doctors instead of just be, and I say just being nurses, not to denigrate nurses at all, but just in that distinction of like you can only be a nurse if you're a female. You can't actually be a doctor.
Yeah, you're not doing the surgeries, you're taking care of them. Yeah.
And I think there's that long history of the dreaded patriarchy telling women that these are the things that are permissible for them to do, that are acceptable. Now that we're breaking down those walls, I think there's women like the young woman that you mentioned who are just grinders and are like, no, I'm going to conquer the world on my own. And you know what? If I find someone who can keep up along the way, cool. If not, I'm all right.
Yeah.
And that's great to see. I have to say that's fantastic, because I think every individual should have that choice and have that opportunity. And so I think culturally there have been those limits, but then there's that reality of, and I think this applies to both men and women. I mean, men have, again, culturally been able to get away with being absent fathers, right? As long as you work your ass off and you bring home the bacon, then historically that was all that was asked of you. Yeah. You didn't have to actually parent. You didn't have to actually raise your kids. I know that in my generation, men have really made a conscious decision. No, I want to actually be involved. And we know now, we got lots of good data now that you said something earlier about why would a kid need a father?
Yeah.
Along those lines. Well, we know that developmentally, actually, if males and females are both, if those role models are both present, kids of every kind of gender identification, anything, develop in a much more healthy psychological state than if it's just one. So we know that there's benefits there.
Yeah, and it makes sense too. Just, I guess, culturally.
Yeah, I think that when it comes to that, because you're in a unique position, you know, because you're in this program that expects this mentality of workaholic, to use a classic term, you know, or in how people like to talk about their work-life balance of, well, you're just going to work and your life you get to figure out on your own. Yep. in the few hours that you're awake outside of work. And so you get this kind of interesting perspective on that a lot of college students don't get. Right? Most of your, I mean, at university, at IU, most of your students are cruising along, and they're in a social communications major. They're, you know, you were talking about a psych program. They're psych majors. They don't really know what they're going to do when they graduate. There's no sort of like, hey, as a psychologist, you'll be expected to work 90 hours a week, right? Nobody gets that in their programs. And so that I think when you have your curiosity about the human condition and human behavior, and then your perspective, I think it's a really cool combination. I think you've got a really fortunate perspective to take.
Well, I'll tell you. So, I mean, I ask these questions every single day of my life, right?
I can tell, and that's awesome. You better be careful, because you're going to find yourself in a graduate program in anthropology going, man, I should have stuck with finance and marketing. But I'll say this. I think that what we have done in too many situations, both on the male patriarchy side, on the workforce and our expectations there, is we have gotten away from what those core elements of human behavior are. You know, one of the things that the pandemic really drove home for me was, it was amazing to me how many people felt like they were failing simply because they couldn't go to work.
Oh, don't get me started with that. Oh.
Yet they were staying home and taking care of their parents and their kids, and they were doing the things that humans have done for literally millions of years. And they felt like they were failures because they couldn't do a thing that humans have done for 1,500 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
And as a consultant, I worked with several people last year who were struggling through things, and I was working with them, talking to them about, listen, it requires a mental shift. And I had one friend who was working from home, didn't lose their job, was actually more productive from home than they were when they went into the office. Their boss was still on them about, when can you come back into the office? Can't wait for you to be back into the office. And with all of their office mates, and we talked about it, and I said, you're going to have a heart-to-heart with your boss. You got a kid that you don't know when you're going to be able to put him back in school, and your kid has to be your priority.
Well, so do you want to hear my theory on this? And this is something that, I have a pretty solid foundation on. Like, I think I hit rock bottom on this in terms of I understand it. And I think, and this is a long drawn out explanation, but I'll give it to you in 3 steps. You ready? First one is the basic explanation that we were talking about before, which is very simply, it's better to have more money, right? It's better to have more money and have more status. Great start, right? Second, many people, and this is the big twist, which is a slight shift, but it explains it psychologically, in that therefore we tie our self-worth, our self-value, in terms of how much money we make. And
absolutely, yeah.
With our status, right? Like that one, just like they fit so well together, almost like a lock and key, but yet we never think of it that way. Third, therefore, when we are not doing things, therefore, when we are not being productive, when we are not doing the things that, will give us status, money, all of these things, then our self-worth is gone. Our self-worth was so tied into our work, and the fact that now that we're not working, we just get this paralyzing anxiety of, holy crap, I need to be doing something. I need to be doing something. I need to be making myself feel worthy again, because if I don't do something, then I will not feel worthy. And God, like to cure something like that is so difficult, but I think that's the way we are at the moment. And this underlying anxiety is the reason for so many of the problems that we experience. Something like, first of all, the ability that we can't go to sleep. That's just naturally the result of anxiety. But second of all, and the fact that we feel the need to focus on so many things. And get distracted and distract ourselves from this existential dread. And for example, the perfect explanation is a phone, right? Like, let's say, okay, you know what? You're sitting there, you're bored. What do? The first thing that you do is very simple. You go on your phone. And the people get a misconception about a phone. When you're on a phone, you think you're distracted and you think you're not focused. But in reality, you are hyper focused. You are literally tuning out the rest of the world and just focusing on this one very thing, which is your phone. And, well, if you're focusing on one thing, that means you're tuning out the rest of the world by definition, and therefore you don't have to focus on your existential dread, and therefore you don't have to focus on your anxiety. But then when you sit down and go to sleep, you're left with this anxiety. I personally believe that's why so many people get into addictions nowadays, smoking, drugs. I think that's why a lot of people smoke weed, because it helps them alleviate their anxiety, which is clinically proven. We know that. And well, that's...
Hey, trust me, I'm in Oregon. Okay.
I heard you guys have fun over in that state.
I'm the odd man out, because I don't happen to smoke weed, and everyone that I know basically does at this point.
Well, you seem to be a very relaxed guy too. One of the things is I don't see you as someone who ties their self-worth into the amount of value that they produce.
I think I was fortunate that my parents really, really drove into me when I was a kid, that how you treated other people and how you treated your family were far more important than how many hours you work per week. I mean, at the same time, I had a dad who, during the right times of the year would work his 90 hours a week to support his family, and almost worked himself into the ground doing that. But it taught me that there are these things that are more important. And I think at the same time, being an evolutionary anthropologist gives you that kind of perspective too, because like I said, last year there were thousands upon thousands of people who were doing simply what humans have been doing for millions of years, taking care of their families and getting by and figuring out how to get by. But I completely think that you're right on with the idea of the self-worth. I've talked about that in my consulting business. I talk to people about life work balance and that whole kind of trope that's out there of developing your life work balance. And I started developing a program where I just said, so think about life work balance, throw it out the window. There's no such thing as a life work balance because
why?
Because we're not separate. It's not like we have a life and we have work. Our work is our life for most people. And like you were saying, and so I'm like, so let's just throw that out the window because it's a false dichotomy that people are asking you to put effort into. And instead, let's figure out how to make your life better in all those aspects. And it's just kind of like flipping it on its head. It's taking the work-life balance and saying, let's just flip it on its head and imagine that we're not trying to parcel them out and say, oh no, you need, 16 more hours per week at home outside of work. That may not work for people.
Yeah.
And for me, what I've noticed in my life is it's almost a cliche, but it's not quantity of time. It's really the quality. It's like what I pick to do when I'm not working on a project specifically. When my daughter and I do a lot of camping together, in the outdoors a lot together, when I decide, no, these 3 days are just going to be dedicated to fishing, or we're going to go hiking, or we're going to do this. I put everything into that while I'm doing it. Then when I come back, I put everything into the project that I'm working on. And I think not that I think that I'm some sort of like savant who figured it out. I think if more people had that kind of perspective of, rather than trying to do it all at once, I'm gonna jump away for 15 minutes here and do this, and then I'm gonna do this, and then I'm gonna do this. If they were able to, I think it would help a lot. I do think that last year a lot of people just missed that, where they, like you said, they felt like they had no self-worth in the beginning because they couldn't go to work. They couldn't do the things they normally do. And that was where I worked with a lot of people on, this is your opportunity. This is your opportunity to figure out what your worth actually is. When you show up and you're delivering meals through a screen door to your grandparents and they got big smiles on their faces.
Yeah.
That's pretty good self-worth.
Well, you know what I found, right? And this is the obvious natural conclusion of the people not knowing what to do with their lives is that alcohol sales went up like crazy. Netflix, people were going crazy on Netflix, Hulu, Disney Plus, all of these things. Like it was a common thing in my family. We talk about it all the time. And I told my parents, I was like, why are we speaking like this? Like people be like, oh, you're struggling. What Netflix show are you watching? Like what Hulu show are you watching? And
look, Tiger King was, number one in America.
That's a great show. I watched it.
I can honestly say I've never seen an episode. I'm one of the few Americans, I think. But yeah, when you have something like that can take over the consciousness of America for 2.5 months or however long that lasted, it really, really does show how lost people can get really easily.
Yeah.
And I do think, I think it is a really points to failures that we have. And this is something we can talk about at a different time, but failures that we have in American society specifically, of things like this is one thing that I think would be interesting to talk about at some point.
Oh, trust me,
Maybe
you could come back. You got the full
yeah,
interviews.
maybe in a future podcast is talking about talking about the development of men and women and how we become men and women across the globe and in our society. We've
Great topic.
completely gotten rid of the rituals that we have had for millennia of how we become men in societies or how we become women in societies.
Yeah.
And those are things that are part of our psyche too that we're ignoring. And I think all those kind of blend together. I think all those things this last year really showed us that there are a lot of people out there who they've never become a complete adult on their own. And you guys at your age, in the programs that you're in, you guys are also in this amazing period where your job right now, like you said early on in our discussion here, is to figure things out. Like your guys' job right now is to figure out, people figuring out their sexuality, people figuring out where they fit with who their quote unquote tribe is, their friend group that's gonna be there to support them, who potential mates are, where they want to live, what kind of jobs they want to do, all those things. I mean, that's the beauty of, I'm a huge fan of liberal arts universities, and this is why, is because this is what it's for. Oh, I lost you.
Oh, there we go. You ready? You
Yeah.
good? Yeah, my friend Loredana, she said something that just blew my mind away. And she's girl sharp, super sharp. And she literally she told me, I think college is literally, this is the point of college. First, to figure out who you are, then to figure out what you want to do with your life. And I love that, because I think, people stumble around lost, right? People stumble around lost. And you know what? Maybe it was easier back in the day when somebody just told you, hey, listen, you're working in the oil rig. Have fun. Good luck. You're going to be a carpenter. Good luck, and you're told that when you're 18 and you go off, hey, you're going to the military. Enjoy. This is just what the family does, and this is what you're going to do.
Well, you're a Jersey guy.
Yes,
Think of that Bruce Springsteen song where for his 18th birthday, he got a union job and a wedding coat. Like he got a girl pregnant. You get a job at the union, where your dad works, and hey, you're part of the union. That means you get benefits. Awesome, right? You get to take care of your kids. That's Americana for decades.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, a lot of people, they criticize college. They criticize it as something like suspending adolescence, And to some degree, I would agree. To some degree, I would disagree, To the degree that I would agree, sorry, that's a tongue twister, but to the degree that I would agree, yes, like people are in college and they are lost. They have no idea what they want to do with themselves. They have no idea who they are. And you know what? God put me in that damn category because I'm part of it, But then you could say, wait a second. The people who were 18, 50 years ago and weren't lost, does that mean that they were individuals who had figured it out and had become conscious and learn stuff out for themselves? No, they were told what to do and they did it. And to some degree, maybe this quote delaying adolescence is just more of, you know what, let's let the kid figure it out for themselves. Which, I mean,
it absolutely is, and it really is a privileged position to be in, and I say that having gone through too many years of college, probably. It is a privileged position to be in, but it's one that is. Let me say this about just college in general. I know we're way off where we're going to talk about.
No matter, we're doing well.
but just in general, I think we do have a problem these days in the fact that we've turned college into this kind of retail business.
Yeah.
Where students are customers, professors are service providers, and you've got advertisements of get your bachelor's in 3 years, and make it, get your money's worth here. This is not what a liberal arts university is for. A liberal arts university, your friend had it right on, is absolutely for people to figure out who the hell they are and then what the hell they want to do. And a lot of them, the what the hell they want to do doesn't even come while they're in college, right? It comes 2 years afterward when they go, oh, hey, I could take my fine arts degree and I could apply it to this and go to work in this area.
Well, that's actually really interesting. One of the I think it was Carl Rogers who said, big psychologist, and he said, "My goal as a therapist is not to help people per se or change their actions or do anything like that. My goal is simply to give them more options." Because people are so focused on, okay, here's the problem, here's the solution, the way it's always been done. And maybe college, if we're going to expand it that way, is just say, maybe it just opens them up a little bit to see, all right, you know what, maybe the world's a little bit brighter than I thought.
Well, and let me say this. On the flip side, I think that we have put too much emphasis on everyone needs to go to college.
Yeah.
I think that's crap. I think the reality is that only people, the people who should be going to college are the people who are going because they have these driving questions about who they are, the world itself. They want the education part of it. And that education is an individual education. It's, a formal education. It's all of that. At the same time, someone who comes out of high school and says, I don't want to go to college. I want to be an electrician. I want to be a plumber. I'm interested in auto mechanics.
Yep.
I'm interested. We need all those folks, and we need to appreciate the fact that, hey, you didn't go to college. Okay, so you don't have a degree, but when my toilet blows up in the middle of Thanksgiving when I've got all my relatives here, you came out and fixed it.
Yeah, and another way of looking at it is, okay, you know what? There are multiple ways to find a fulfilling life,
Exactly. We need to encourage that, I think, as a society, because it's really easy for me, especially when I was a professor, to sit there and, oh yeah, send your kids to college. I don't know how many times I had kids come for visitations to the university I was working at, and I turned them off of coming to college. They were talking to me about, a lot of them were coming in. They have no idea why they're even going to college. They have no interest in sitting in class. What they want to do is they want to go out into the world and they want to work a little bit. They want to figure things out that way, then maybe come back. And I would be like, you know what, that's a fantastic idea. And I'd talk to their parents and I'd be like, hey, maybe you should think about the fact that your kid really just wants to go and work, at the local coffee stand for a year. And trust me, if that's not fulfilling for them, they're going to want to get out of it. They're going to want to go back to school.
Well, here's one of the things that I noticed, and you know what, like, people don't really understand the consequences of sending someone to college when they're not supposed to. So let me sort of lay it out for you as somebody who, and I'm sure you've seen it, right? And this is something that people make cases of all the time. If you send someone to college, right? So the way I like to think about it is humans are motivated by many things. We are motivated by good things. We are motivated by bad things. So let's say we are motivated. We have our higher motivations, to do good in the world and pursue a career and all of these things. And then we have our lower motives, which is, sex, like the 7 deadly sins, like just lying around and doing nothing for the rest of your life, doing drugs, all of these things that you would typically associate with all of these terrible things. And what I usually notice is that, well, if you are not motivated by your higher drives, if you just go to college and you are just not in it, you're not enjoying it, then those monkey brain, those deeper, lower parts of you are just, well, they're not going to be trumped by the higher motives. I think we have some sort of default network in that we just fall to these lower motives. And You'll see it in college all the time. College is, I think Joe Rogan describes it this way. It's literally a 4-year, ticket to paradise where everybody has hormones. Everybody just wants to have sex with each other and nobody has any idea what they're doing with their lives and everybody's completely vulnerable. And to some degree, that's just ridiculously true because many of the people I know in college are just doing things, especially the finance majors and accounting majors. They're just like, well, I'm not enjoying the things that I'm supposed to be doing, so I'm going to end up falling to my lower motives. And that's the people who kind of waste 4 years of their life when they're in college. And that's brutal. Like that, like I've seen a lot of people fall apart from that. I've seen a lot of my friends like really, really like, pulling up with 2 point something GPAs, not sure if they're going to graduate in 4 years, failing classes. And it's like, you know what? And I could have told them straight up, like when I met them freshman year, you shouldn't be here. You shouldn't be here. And that's not an insult. It's just, this place is not meant for you. You're meant to discover the world in a different way. And it has its negative consequences.
And I'll say that's the critical thing that you just said that's important there. Is it's not an insult. And that's what we have to get away from. We have to get away from if somebody starts college and a term in or 2 years in or however long in goes, this isn't for me. We have to respect that decision instead of looking down on them as some sort of failure. College, especially like when I was doing my PhD, I was at an Ivy League school. Talk about that sort of status and that impact there. There was a very strong culture of can you cut it or not? And I'm just talking freshman classes and not even getting into any sort of programs at that point. And that's a really unfortunate behavior that we've propagated.
Yeah.
Of can you cut it or not? Because as you pointed out, you have friends who probably shouldn't have been there. I had friends who, when I was in school, I was trying to figure out, why are you sitting in class next to me and not taking any notes? And I'm old enough that this is pre-cell phones and tablets, so no one had those to distract them. This is just sitting in class doodling on your leg or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's all the same of you shouldn't be there, right? You shouldn't be taking the space of someone who really wants to be there. You also shouldn't be wasting your time putting yourself in, like you said. Maybe you're headed down depression road. Maybe you're going to start doing these kind of vices that you wouldn't otherwise. I have a friend. One of the proudest moments I've had with him was when he told me halfway through our freshman year he was leaving school to join the Navy, and he's going to become an electrician. And I was like, that's awesome, because you should not be sitting in class. Like you have no interest in being there.
Well, so here's the thing, right? And I've done my research on you. You study a lot on dominance, right? Male dominance of one male to another. And I'll tell you about just the thing that has been gripping my mind for the last 2 weeks, which is very simply, at the Kelley School of Business, people make fun at Indiana University, people make fun of the people in the Kelley School of Business. And the reason why is because they are better. And, the reason why is because of said superiority complex, right? Like, the people in Kelley get the higher paying jobs and all of these things. And when I say better, I mean just in terms of finance and all of that, like strictly numbers coming out of college in terms of salary. But when you look at that, everyone outside of Kelley makes fun of Kelley. They have all these names, the joke is they call them Kelley boners. Yeah, it's a bit of an offhand joke, but like, like it shows, right? Something like Yeah. And it's everybody says it, right? Kelly boners, like all these people who are, just showing off their Kelly, their Kelly, I'm better than you, essentially. And I'm starting to realize that when people say Kelly, it carries something, right? It carries some sort of, okay, you know what? Prestige, dominance. I'm better than you. You're worse than me. And which is completely artificial, right? Like, let's say you say I went to Yale and I say I went to local community college. It carries something if you care, right? Like, it carries something with it. And I don't know what to, I don't know what to think about that, right? Like, people are so fragile in their self-esteems, which, hey, listen, maybe that's a good thing, maybe that's a bad thing, maybe you should be looking out for yourself. But at the same time, they're so fragile where they're like, you know what? Like, damn it, I'm not in Kelly. Maybe I should make fun of them so it doesn't feel as bad. So I'm not being absolutely dominated, And I think that's why Kelly Boner, that phrase originated, which is such a weird, like, complex. I don't know.
Yeah, the infighting, and this gets into, and again, I'll happily come back another time. We've been on for a while, so I should probably go pretty soon. But
we'll wrap it up. Yep.
But this gets into another element that I think is worth talking about at some point, is in groups versus out groups, and how you identify with those.
Yeah.
And the short answer I would say is probably that tradition comes from the fact that people in the Kelly School of, is it business and finance or
just business? Yeah, Kelly School of Business.
Okay, Kelly School of Business probably pointed out to many of their IU colleagues at some point that a lot of them were going to be working for them after they graduated. And there's probably some reality there, right? There's probably some reality within Indiana, especially where there's Kelly School of Business graduates have started up X number of businesses, and a lot of IU graduates end up working for those businesses. And this is something that is one of those, when you were trying to get at what the term that I like to use is talking about our primal drivers and our primal behaviors.
Yeah.
This is one of those of keeping someone else down as long as you can. And humans have the ability of having the foresight of, that person is going to excel in this, and I may be answering to them someday. So I'm going to keep them down as long as I can, with the hopes that I continue to dominate them. And we see it all the time. I mean, again, you can go right back to the Bill Gates example. Bill Gates talks about when he was growing up and the guys who would bully him when he was growing up. And he's since had interactions with those guys. And, some of them have called him Mr. Gates. And he looks at them like, what is wrong with you? I'm Bill. We've known each other forever. It flipped, and that status flipped. And I think that humans are one of the few species that, or maybe the only species, that can look forward and say, oh crap, those guys, they're in finance and in Kelly, they're going to be buying and selling the companies that we work for in 10 years.
Yeah.
And so we're going to put them down now, and it's not even a conscious decision. It's just a reaction.
And there's so much psychology that goes into it. Oh my God. And you're coming on again. Yeah. You're coming on again. That is a not even a question, because I need to ask you about, these rituals, dominance, like the psychology of dominance and bullies and keeping people down, and this phenomenon that I see all the time of, pushing for people who are agreeable, especially like me, like they'll push you as far as you let them, and that sort of dynamic. Oh yeah, right. So you're coming back. We're going to be answering those questions. But for the moment, thank you for coming on, and tell people where they could find you.
So www.you-evolving.com is my website. So youevolving.com. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Instagram, at You Evolving for both, and Facebook as well. I've also got my own podcast that you can find on most streams. That is at You Evolving. So this is a business name that I gave for my consulting business, because really what I try and work for is people's personal growth, and so that personal change over time is someone evolving, and so yeah, at You Evolving, find me.
And I highly suggest that you check out his first podcast episode about love. And I literally listened to it and it blew my mind. And we covered a little bit on here, but there's so much more. It gets so much deeper and there is so much to learn here. So you are coming back, and thank you for coming on.
Thanks, Nick.
Awesome. Thank you for listening to this episode of The Nick Lugo Show with Dr. Hogan Sherrow. To support this podcast, please give me a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and, well, subscribe to my YouTube channel. And so I'll leave you with the quote by Martin Luther King himself. An individual has not started living until he could rise above the narrow confines of his individualistic concerns to the broader concerns of all humanity. Think about how that relates to this podcast. I absolutely love that quote. And, well, thank you for listening, and I hope to see you again next week.